A cowboy protected a towering Apache woman. Next day, her tribe surrounded his ranch. The tracks didn't belong to any horse Silas had seen before. They were too deep, too deliberate, leading straight toward the canyon, where no one should be traveling alone. But what he found there made even less sense than the tracks themselves. She was sitting against the red rocks, perfectly still, watching him with eyes that seemed to know something he didn't. Her clothes were torn, blood dried on her arm, but she wore silver jewelry that caught the light like it was meant for ceremony, not travel. An Apache woman, tall enough to look most men in the eye, but she wasn't running from him. She wasn't even afraid. When their eyes met, she spoke a single word in her language, then switched to English as if she'd been expecting him all along. You came, but that was impossible. Silas had never seen her before, never been to this canyon, never followed those strange tracks until today. How could she have been waiting for him? And why was she dressed like someone important, sitting alone and injured in the middle of nowhere, speaking as if they'd planned to meet? The strangest part wasn't her calm demeanor or the expensive silver she wore. It was the sound echoing from deeper in the canyon, voices calling in Apache, getting closer, but she showed no relief at hearing them. Instead, her hand moved to something hidden in her clothing, and her eyes never left his face. They're looking for me, she said quietly, but not to help. The tracks didn't belong to any horse Silas had seen before. They were too deep, too deliberate, leading straight toward the canyon where no one should be traveling alone. But what he found there made even less sense than the tracks themselves. She was sitting against the red rocks, perfectly still, watching him with eyes that seemed to know something he didn't. Her clothes were torn, blood dried on her arm, but she wore silver jewelry that caught the light like it was meant for ceremony, not travel. An Apache woman, tall enough to look most men in the eye, but she wasn't running from him. She wasn't even afraid. When their eyes met, she spoke a single word in her language, then switched to English, as if she'd been expecting him all along. You came, but that was impossible. Silas had never seen her before, never been to this canyon, never followed those strange tracks until today. How could she have been waiting for him? And why was she dressed like someone important, sitting alone and injured in the middle of nowhere, speaking as if they'd planned to meet? The strangest part wasn't her calm demeanor or the expensive silver she wore. It was the sound echoing from deeper in the canyon, voices calling in Apache, getting closer, but she showed no relief at hearing them. Instead, her hand moved to something hidden in her clothing, and her eyes never left his face. They're looking for me, she said quietly, but not to help. Silas heard the voices growing louder, more urgent. His instincts told him to mount his horse and ride away from whatever trouble this woman carried. But something in her voice, the way she watched those canyon walls like they held her death sentence, made him hesitate. What did you do? He asked. She stood slowly, and he realized just how tall she was, nearly matching his own height, moving with the grace of someone accustomed to command. I refused to marry the man my father chose, a man who would unite our tribe with another through my sacrifice. The voices were close now, too close. Silas could make out individual words, though he didn't understand them. What he did understand was the tone. They weren't calling for a lost daughter. They were hunting. They'll kill me before they let me dishonor the arrangement, she said, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that made his chest tighten. And they'll kill anyone who helps me. Silas looked at his horse, then at the woman whose name he didn't even know. The smart choice was obvious. The right choice felt like something else entirely. The voices rounded the bend. In seconds, they would see them both. Silas made his decision, knowing it might be the last choice he ever made as a free man. He extended his hand to her, but as she reached for it, the first Apache warrior appeared at the canyon's mouth, and Silas realized he had just stepped into something far more dangerous than a simple runaway bride. The Apache warrior froze when he saw them, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Silas felt the woman's fingers close around his wrist, not grasping for help, but holding him steady, as if she knew he might bolt. Ayana, the warrior called, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and something darker. Father has sent us to bring you home. Tell my father I choose my own path, she replied, her voice carrying across the canyon with the authority of someone born to lead. 3 more warriors emerged from behind the rocks. Silas counted odds in his head, 4 against 1, with a woman to protect who might be more liability than help. His hand stayed near his weapon, but he didn't draw. Not yet. The first warrior's eyes shifted to Silas, studying him with the careful attention of a man assessing a threat. "White man, you do not understand what you've stepped into. This woman belongs to another." "I don't belong to anyone," Ayanna said, stepping slightly in front of Silas. The movement was subtle, but it sent a message. She was protecting him as much as he was protecting her. "Your intended husband has already paid the bride price," another warrior said. "The alliance between our tribes depends on this union. You would risk war over your selfish desires?" Silas saw something shift in Ayanna's expression. A flicker of doubt, guilt perhaps, but she didn't back down. "I won't be traded like a horse to secure a peace that should never require my sacrifice." The lead warrior's patience was wearing thin. Silas could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his grip tightened on his weapon. "Come willingly, or we take you by force. The white man can ride away and pretend this never happened." "No," Ayanna said simply. The word hung in the canyon air, like the moment before lightning strikes. Silas felt the shift in the warrior's stance, saw them spread out slightly, creating better angles of attack. "Then we have a problem," the lead warrior said, drawing his knife. That's when Silas noticed what he should have seen earlier. These weren't just any Apache warriors. The intricate beadwork on their clothing, the quality of their weapons, the way they carried themselves with absolute confidence in their authority. These men weren't just hunting a runaway bride. They were hunting the daughter of a chief. Ayanna must have seen the realization in his face. "Now you understand what you've chosen to defend," she said quietly. "A woman worth a war." The warriors began to close in, and Silas knew that whatever happened in the next few minutes would echo far beyond this canyon. But there was something else he was beginning to understand, something that made his blood run cold. If these warriors had to kill him to take Ayanna back, there would be no witnesses to say she hadn't been kidnapped by a white rancher, and nothing would stop her father from using that story to justify the war he apparently wanted anyway. Silas drew his revolver in one smooth motion, the metallic click echoing off the canyon walls. The Apache warriors paused, not from fear, but from calculation. They knew as well as he did that one gun against 4 knives in close quarters was poor odds for everyone. "I'm not looking for trouble," Silas said, keeping his weapon trained on the lead warrior. "But I won't stand by while you drag an unwilling woman away." The warrior smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. "You think this is about one woman's wishes? This marriage will prevent the deaths of hundreds. Her selfishness threatens both our peoples." "Whose war?" Ayanna demanded, stepping forward despite Silas's protective stance. "Father's war, or the war you warriors hunger for? I've heard the council meetings. I know some of you grow tired of peace." The accusation hit its mark. Silas saw the flash of anger in the lead warrior's eyes, the way the others shifted uncomfortably. There was politics here, layers of tribal conflict he couldn't understand. "Your father's word is law," the warrior said through gritted teeth. "And his word is that you return home to fulfill your duty." "Then let me speak to my father myself," Ayanna replied. "Face to face, as is my right as his daughter. You lost that right when you fled like a coward in the night." Silas caught the subtle insult, saw how it stiffened Ayanna's spine. These weren't just warriors retrieving a runaway bride. They were men who disapproved of her, possibly even hated her for disrupting their plans. "She goes nowhere against her will," Silas said firmly. The lead warrior's attention snapped back to him. "You would die for a woman you met moments ago? A woman whose very existence threatens your people's safety? What do you mean? When we return without her, we must report what we found. A white rancher who kidnapped the chief's daughter. How long do you think your ranch will stand once that story reaches our people?" The words hit Silas like cold water. He was being maneuvered into an impossible position. Help Ayanna escape and become the spark that ignites a war. Let them take her and watch an innocent woman be forced into marriage with a man she despised. "There's another way," Ayanna said quietly. "Tell my father you couldn't find me. Tell him I disappeared without a trace. We cannot lie to our chief," one of the other warriors said, speaking for the first time. "Even if your truth starts a war that will kill your brothers?" she asked. The warriors exchanged glances. Silas could see the conflict in their faces, duty warring with doubt, honor wrestling with practicality. That's when the sound of approaching horses reached them from the canyon's entrance. More riders coming fast, and from the thunder of hooves, there were many of them. The lead warrior's face went pale. The search party from the rival tribe. They're early. Silas felt his heart sink as he understood. It wasn't just Ayanna's father looking for her. Her intended husband's people were hunting her too. And if they found her here, with him, diplomatic complications would become the least of his worries. How many? Ayanna asked, her voice tight with new fear. Enough to ensure you never have a choice again, the warrior replied. And for the first time, Silas heard genuine concern in his voice, and enough to make sure no witnesses remained to complicate their story. The horses were getting closer, their riders pushing hard across the desert floor. Silas could count at least 8, maybe more, and they rode with the urgency of men who had found their prey's trail. "We have to move," the lead warrior said, his animosity toward Silas suddenly replaced by something approaching cooperation. "If Red Bear's men find her here, they will take her by force and anyone who opposes them will die." "Red Bear?" Silas asked. "The man I was promised to," Ayanna said, her voice heavy with disgust. "A warrior who believes women are possessions to be claimed, not people to be respected." The irony wasn't lost on Silas. The same Apache warriors who had been ready to drag her home moments ago were now looking genuinely worried about her falling into Red Bear's hands. "There's a hidden passage," one of the younger warriors said, pointing toward a narrow crack in the canyon wall. "It leads to the mesa top. We could get her away from here." "And then what?" Ayanna demanded. "Hide me like a shameful secret while you decide my fate? I'm tired of being treated like a problem to be solved rather than a person with rights." Silas admired her courage, but courage wouldn't stop a dozen warriors from doing whatever they pleased with her. "Sometimes living to fight another day is the only choice you get," he said quietly. The sound of horses grew thunderous, echoing off the canyon walls. They were out of time for debate. "This way," the lead warrior commanded, but he was looking at Silas now with something like respect. "You could have run when you had the chance. Why didn't you?" "Same reason you're helping her now instead of handing her over to Red Bear," Silas replied, following Ayanna toward the narrow passage. "Some things are more important than the easy path." They squeezed through the crack in single file, Ayanna leading, Silas behind her, the Apache warriors bringing up the rear. The passage was tight, forcing them to move slowly when every instinct screamed for speed. Behind them, they could hear voices in the canyon, men calling to each other in Apache. Red Bear's search party had arrived. "They'll find our tracks," one of the warriors whispered. "Not if we're lucky," the leader replied. "The wind has been strong today." But luck, Silas knew, was a poor strategy when lives hung in the balance. As they climbed through the narrow stone corridor, he could hear the voices below growing more organized, more systematic. These weren't men who would give up easily. Halfway through the passage, Ayanna stopped suddenly. "There's something you all need to know," she said, turning to face them in the cramped space. "Red Bear didn't just offer a bride price for me. He threatened to raid our villages if my father refused. This marriage isn't about alliance. It's about submission." The Apache warriors' faces darkened with understanding. They had been told this was about peace, but it was really about avoiding a war they weren't prepared to fight. "Why didn't your father tell us this?" the lead warrior asked. "Because he knows you would rather die fighting than live as subjects," Ayanna replied. "And he's trying to protect you from making that choice." Silas felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. This wasn't just about one woman's freedom. It was about the survival of her entire people. And now, whether he liked it or not, his ranch stood directly in the path of forces much larger than himself. From below came the sound of discovery, shouts, the scrape of metal against stone. Red Bear's men had found the passage. The shouts from below echoed through the stone passage as Red Bear's warriors discovered their escape route. Silas pressed against the narrow walls, feeling the rough stones scrape his shoulders as they climbed higher into the mesa's heart. "They're coming up fast," one of Ayanna's tribal warriors whispered, looking back down the passage with growing alarm. Ayanna moved with surprising speed through the tight space, her tall frame navigating the corridor like she had traveled it before. "There's an exit ahead, but it opens onto the mesa top, completely exposed ground. Better than being trapped in here like animals," Silas muttered, hearing the voices growing closer behind them. They emerged onto the flat mesa surface just as the sun reached its peak, providing no shadows to hide their movement. The vast desert stretched in all directions, beautiful and merciless. Silas's ranch lay visible in the distance, a small collection of buildings that suddenly seemed impossibly far away. "There," the lead warrior pointed toward a cluster of rocks near the mesa's edge. "We can defend that position." "Defend against how many?" Silas asked, counting the dust clouds rising from multiple directions across the desert floor. Red Bear hadn't just brought a search party, he had brought an army. Ayanna studied the approaching riders with the calm assessment of someone trained in warfare. At least 20 warriors. My father taught me to count enemy forces by their dust signatures. Your father trained you for war? Silas asked, beginning to understand why she moved with such confidence. He trained all his children equally, regardless of their gender. Another reason Red Bear wants to control me. A warrior woman threatens his vision of how tribes should be ruled. The first of Red Bear's men emerged from the passage behind them, forcing the group to sprint toward the rocky outcropping. Silas felt exposed, vulnerable, running across open ground while enemies closed in from multiple directions. They reached the rocks just as arrows began whistling past their heads. Not aimed to kill, Silas realized, but to corner and capture. Red Bear wanted Ayanna alive, but everyone else was expendable. We can hold them for a while, the Apache warrior said, checking his weapons. But not forever. Ayanna crouched beside Silas behind a boulder, close enough that he could smell the sage smoke in her hair, see the determined set of her jaw. "This is my fault," she said. "You should never have been involved in tribal politics." "Maybe not," Silas replied, reloading his revolver. "But I'm involved now." She looked at him with something that might have been gratitude, or possibly something deeper. "When this ends badly, know that I appreciate what you tried to do. It's not ending badly if I have anything to say about it." But even as he spoke, Silas could see more warriors surrounding their position. Red Bear was taking no chances. He was deploying enough force to crush any resistance completely. From their rocky fortress, they watched Red Bear himself ride into view. A massive man whose very presence seemed to command the desert around him. Even at a distance, Silas could feel the weight of his authority, the casual certainty of someone accustomed to taking whatever he wanted. Red Bear raised his hand, and his warriors stopped advancing. Then he did something that chilled Silas to his core. He smiled and began riding slowly toward their position, alone and completely unafraid. "He's coming to negotiate," Ayanna said, but her voice carried no relief. "That means he's confident he already holds all the advantages." Silas watched the approaching figure and realized she was right. Men like Red Bear didn't negotiate from weakness. They negotiated when they wanted to enjoy their victory before claiming it. Red Bear dismounted 50 yards from their position, close enough to speak but far enough to avoid any desperate attack. He was even larger than he had appeared on horseback, with scars across his arms that spoke of countless battles won. When he smiled, it was the expression of a predator who had cornered his prey. "Ayanna, daughter of Chief Standing Wolf," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the mesa. "You have led us on quite a chase." "I owe you nothing, Red Bear," she replied, standing despite the Apache warrior's attempts to pull her down behind cover. "Not my presence, not my respect, and certainly not my obedience." Red Bear's laugh was deep and genuinely amused, still defiant. "I admire that spirit. It will make our marriage more interesting." Silas felt Ayanna tense beside him. He could see her fighting every instinct to respond with the fury that Red Bear was deliberately provoking. "But first," Red Bear continued, his tone shifting to something darker, "we must address the insult you have given me by running to a white man for protection. Did you think I would not learn of this?" "She didn't run to me," Silas called out. "I found her injured and offered help. Nothing more." Red Bear's attention fixed on him with uncomfortable intensity. "Ah, the rescuer speaks. Tell me, White Rancher, do you know what happens to men who interfere with Apache business? I imagine you're about to tell me. Your ranch sits on good land, water, grass for cattle, defensible positions. My warriors have been watching it for months, waiting for the right reason to claim it." Red Bear's smile widened. "You've just given me that reason." Silas felt the trap closing around him. This had never been about just retrieving Ayanna. Red Bear had been planning to take his land all along, and Silas had walked directly into providing the justification. "You see," Red Bear continued, addressing both Silas and Ayanna now, "when I returned to tell Chief Standing Wolf that his daughter was being held captive by a white rancher, he will have no choice but to demand justice. And justice, in this case, will require removing the threat you represent to our people." "My father would never believe such lies," Ayanna said, but Silas could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. "Your father is old, daughter, old and desperate to avoid the war I have promised him if this marriage does not proceed. He will believe what he needs to believe to keep his people safe." The lead Apache warrior who had been pursuing Ayanna stepped forward. Red Bear speaks truth. The chief has already agreed to any reasonable demand to secure peace. Ayanna's face went white with understanding. Her own father would sacrifice Silas to protect the tribe, just as he was willing to sacrifice her to Red Bear's ambition. "So here is my offer," Red Bear announced. "Ayanna comes with me willingly, and the rancher lives. She resists, and I take her anyway. But first my warriors will ensure no one survives to tell a different version of this story." Silas checked his ammunition. 6 bullets against 20 or more warriors. The math was simple, and it was all bad. But as he looked at Ayanna, seeing the way she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in preparation for whatever came next, he realized something had changed. She wasn't looking at Red Bear with fear anymore. She was looking at him with the cold calculation of someone planning a war. Ayanna's fingers traced patterns in the dust between the rocks, but Silas recognized it wasn't nervousness. She was drawing a map, marking positions with the precision of someone who had studied warfare since childhood. "Red Bear made one mistake," she whispered, showing the crude diagram to the Apache warriors. "He brought too many men to the canyon. Most of his force is trapped down there while we hold the high ground." The lead warrior studied her markings with growing interest. "You're thinking like your father now." "I'm thinking like someone who refuses to be traded like cattle," she replied, then looked directly at Silas. "But this plan requires you to trust me completely, even when what I ask seems like betrayal." Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to surrender to Red Bear," she said calmly. "But not the way he expects." "That's suicide," one of the younger warriors protested. "No, it's strategy. Red Bear wants me alive and unharmed. I'm worthless to him damaged, but his arrogance will make him careless once he believes he's won." She turned to Silas. "I need you to return to your ranch immediately. I'm not leaving you. You have to. In 3 hours, Red Bear will bring me to your property to demonstrate his power over white settlers. When he does, I need you to be ready." Silas saw the plan forming in her mind, and it terrified him. "You want to use my ranch as a battlefield. I want to use it as a trap. Red Bear expects to find you cowering in fear, ready to hand over your land to save your life. Instead, you're going to show him what happens when someone underestimates both a determined cowboy and a warrior woman who was raised by a war chief." The Apache warriors were nodding now, understanding her strategy. They would create a diversion here while she surrendered, drawing most of Red Bear's force away from the ranch. By the time Red Bear arrived at Silas's property, he would have only a handful of men with him. "This is incredibly dangerous," Silas said. "If something goes wrong, then I die free rather than live as a possession," Ayanna interrupted. "But it won't go wrong because you won't let it." She reached into her torn clothing and pulled out a small silver pendant, pressing it into his palm. "When Red Bear sees this, he'll know you've been in contact with me. It will make him angry enough to be reckless." Silas looked down at the pendant, feeling its weight. It was beautifully crafted, clearly valuable, and obviously meant something significant to her. "I can't take this. You can and you will. Because when this is over, I want it back." She met his eyes with an intensity that made his breath catch. "And I want to be the one who comes to your ranch to retrieve it." From below came Red Bear's voice, booming across the canyon. "Enough hiding, Ayanna. Come down now, and your new friends might live to see another sunrise." Silas realized this was goodbye, at least for now. Everything depended on whether they could trust each other despite having known each other for less than an hour. 3 hours, Ayanna repeated, standing to reveal herself to Red Bear's men. "Be ready." As she began walking toward the mesa's edge, hands raised in surrender, Silas felt the silver pendant burning in his palm like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. But watching her descend toward certain danger while trusting him to save her, he knew he would die before he let her down. Silas rode harder than he ever had in his life, pushing his horse across the desert toward his ranch while the sun blazed overhead. 3 hours to prepare for a confrontation that would determine whether he lived or died, whether Ayanna remained free or became Red Bear's captive forever. His ranch looked different when he approached it with the eyes of someone planning a battle. The barn offered good cover, the house had thick walls, and the corral provided an escape route if everything went wrong. But it also felt like what it was becoming, a trap that could spring either way. Silas spent the first hour moving his cattle to the far pasture and preparing his weapons. The second hour, He positioned himself in the barn loft with a clear view of the approach road, Ayana's silver pendant heavy in his shirt pocket like a talisman of hope and responsibility. In the third hour, he waited. Red Bear arrived exactly when Ayana had predicted, riding up to the ranch with only 5 warriors, and Ayana herself, her hands bound, but her head held high. The rest of his force was presumably still searching the canyons for the Apache warriors who had helped her escape. "Rancher," Red Bear called out, dismounting with theatrical confidence, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Silas emerged from the barn, the silver pendant clearly visible in his hand. The effect was immediate. Red Bear's face darkened with rage. "So, you did steal her," Red Bear snarled. "You took my promised wife and her family jewelry." "She gave it to me freely," Silas replied, watching as Ayana caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Just like she chose freely to ask for my protection." Red Bear's hand moved to his weapon. "Then you will die for your theft." That's when Ayana made her move. The ropes around her wrist fell away. She had been working them loose during the entire ride. In one fluid motion, she grabbed a knife from the nearest warrior's belt and pressed it to Red Bear's throat before anyone could react. "The only theft here," she said calmly, "is your attempt to steal my life and my father's leadership." Red Bear's warriors raised their weapons, but they hesitated. Killing their leader's intended bride to save him was a political disaster they couldn't afford. "You would murder me in cold blood?" Red Bear asked, though Silas could see sweat beading on his forehead despite his calm tone. "I would end a threat to my people's freedom," Ayana replied, "but I'm offering you a better choice. Leave our lands, cancel your demands, find another tribe to intimidate." "And if I refuse?" Ayana smiled, and it was as dangerous as any weapon Silas had ever seen. "Then everyone will learn how Red Bear, the mighty warrior, was defeated by a woman he thought was helpless." Red Bear's pride warred with his survival instincts. Around them, his warriors waited for orders that would never come. Finally, slowly, he nodded. "This isn't over," he said as Ayana released him. "Yes, it is," she replied with absolute finality. As Red Bear and his men rode away, Silas approached Ayana, holding out her silver pendant. She took it, but her fingers lingered on his hand for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. "Thank you for being worth the trust," he replied. She mounted Red Bear's abandoned horse, preparing to return to her father with news of her victory. But before leaving, she looked back at Silas with something like promise in her eyes. "This pendant belongs to the woman who chooses her own path," she said. "When I'm ready to choose again, I know where to find a man brave enough to stand with me." As she rode toward the setting sun, Silas realized that protecting her had cost him his isolation, but it had given him something far more valuable: the certainty that some people were worth any risk. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where honor and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you these stories. Your support means everything to us.